hips now. And again, your hips are your energy. They're your impulsion, they're your gas, they're everything. If your horse is dragging his hind end, or, sorry, I'm going to cuss a little, if he's dragging his ass, you have no impulsion. You see a lot of horses that people ride really handsy, and they think they have a lot of collection, and the horse is hollow through the back and kind of dragging his ass, and that's not what we want. I don't care if my collected horse is perfect. I would rather feel him use his hind end, lift his rib cage, use his shoulders, and be 80% collected in the face than look like he's collected and not be using his body at all. So hips are super duper important. Hips you can use for more energy. Hips you can use to shut down all your energy. So hips on the ground, what we do, and again, Cletus kind of knows this. I'm just going to put this around. So what we're doing with Cletus, he's pretty perfect for this. He's got this spot right here. So you're just looking right here on his hip. And you apply energy a bunch of different ways. We're going to do energy just with my finger in the air. You also want to be able to use a pressure point on the back side of his rib cage to move his hips, which will relate to riding. But right now we're just going to use my finger in the air, and again, he will kind of demo this fairly well. You want to stay in front of the shoulder. I've seen a lot of people come around. This one's tough. I just watched. I tend to watch a lot of people. I like to see what people are saying, see what people are thinking, and kind of some of it I throw out, some of it I take. You can learn from everybody. You can learn from everybody's mistakes. You can learn from everybody's good stuff. I recently watched somebody who talked about body position, and yes, body language is super important, but I think everybody struggles with body language on the hips. They don't know how to get into that crouch. Some people tend to stay really stiff. Some people tend to contort their bodies pretty oddly. So all I like to teach people is you're keeping your hand up here blocking that front end, because we don't want him to move on top of you. We're not pulling him, so you don't want to be tight. You want to be loose on your line. You don't want him to leave, so you want to be short enough, probably about a foot between the snap and your hand. So if he walks forward, you can kind of bump his nose. But this hand I kind of think about like a windshield wiper. You're moving it when you need to. It doesn't stay fixed right here. If I have to bump him, I'll bump him and then put it right back. If I have to block him, I'll block him. He can kind of accidentally run into my hand if he wants to run on top of me. But my hand is always here. Now what I like to do is I just want to look at that hip. I think about a door, like a half door, and you're kind of looking over and around it. And I don't know if that helps.
Like a barn door, half door.
Yeah, like a barn door. And you want to kind of just think about you're putting all your energy into that hip. People talk about the crouch. Again, I said I was watching somebody earlier and she misused and said she was going to kneel. You don't kneel. Yeah. She was meaning crouch. But you just kind of, it's like you're going to kind of bite him in the butt, basically. So you're just kind of looking at that spot, putting pressure, and he should move that hip. We'll go all the way around. And you can see Cletus is pretty good. He planted that foot. He pivoted it right around. That's what you want. You want him to move off that energy. When that energy leaves, he should stop. Lots of people try to pull and stop their horse with all these exercises, and that's not important. That's not. You want them to fade into the release, if that is right. Is that right?
Yeah. I always think like you ride to it. You know, that wasn't really the right word.
Lots of people like to stop. When I say stop, they'll like try to pull their horse and force them to stop. Let
Just
them
drop
fade
that
into
energy.
it. That pressure stops. If the horse gives you a few extra steps, that's a bonus. You want to take it. You don't want to force them to stop. So again, we'll ask him on the hip. We're just looking at his spot and just applying a little bit of energy. I'll kiss him if he doesn't listen to my finger. Good boy, buddy. And then I'll just take that energy away and he quits. Good boy, Bob.
So, and I think that it's really important too, because with any of the body parts, the more energy applied, if you increase your energy, like hips, you can slow that circle down or you could speed it up. Where if you're thinking about always pulling your horse to stop and
yes,
harnessing that
people,
energy,
when they're learning, they make the mistake of trying to pull that horse through this. When you're riding this, and again, we'll work on this later too. We're just kind of running over body parts and putting out ideas. When you're riding this, a lot of people will lean forward and try to pull their horse through. You really want to sit down, put that weight in your seat. You're concentrating on using this leg, left leg, to move left hip. You're concentrating on moving that hip, not pulling anything. You can use your hand to help bump them or adjust them, but you're never pulling. All the pressure goes right here to that hip.
All right, so let's talk about why having control of your horse's hips is important.
Okay.
What when you think about hips, what is the first thing that you think, I have to have hips to be able to do this?
A million things. Hips control everything. Again, hips are your impulsion and hips are also your stop. For your impulsion, you want your horse, when you're riding them, you want them to drive from the hind end. Again, like I said before, if your horse is dragging from their shoulders, you don't have much happening. You really want them to drive from their hind end and use that hind end. That's your speed control. A big thing with hips is your transitions into your lope and your leads. A lot of people get confused about the footfalls of picking up your right lead or your left lead, which we'll talk about later. But basically, if you want left lead, that drive comes from the right hip. So if we have impulsion from the hips and we can control the hips with pressure, then if we want to, let me change that since I'm on this side. If we want right lead, it starts with the left hind. So if I'm on him, riding him, and I want to pick up right lead, I should be able to bring my left leg back and apply pressure. And he steps on. When he steps under with that, let me go all the way around. When he steps under with that left hind, is now is when I'll lope off. So the more control you have of that hip, the more control you have of your leads, of your canter transitions. When we talk about hips for stopping, there's the train of thought of the one rein stop. And yes, it comes from your flexing and your bending, but it's truly shutting down that hind end. If you flex and bend, your horse can still swing those hips and kind of drive from them. Or if your horse is stiff in the face, they can brace on your hand and that hind end can keep right on going. So if we have control of that hind end and we can completely disengage it with that bend, we have control of his body. Okay, he can just kind of stay in this circle and we can shut him down. So that's kind of the two big things. There's a lot more that we'll touch on later. I mean, do you have thoughts on it?
Not that won't roll into something.
Into other
Yep.
things. Okay.
Yep, we're going to get too off base.
Okay.
So we're talking about shoulders. How does shoulders and having control of shoulders affect the rest of your horse?
Well, shoulders, you want your horse to elevate their shoulders so they can use their hind end better. If your horse is heavy on the shoulders, heavy on the front end, they can't use the hind end. They can't lift their rib cage. they're going to be heavy here, which is going to make your poll and your nose and neck heavy also. If you see a horse going around the arena at the lope or at the canter and they're kind of like a motorcycle, kind of banking all the turns, that's where they're dropping shoulders. We spend a lot of time lifting up a horse's shoulders. Again, they don't have to be perfect. They can, horses can be lazy. Horses want to be lazy. If you don't help them pick up shoulders and work on shoulders, they're going to automatically drop them because it's easier.
Yeah.
So the more you help them lift up shoulders and get on their hind end, the more natural it is for them.
I just think that shoulders are really underrated when people are talking about training and putting a horse together and the body parts. I didn't ever think about shoulders individually until like 5 years ago, and then it made sense to me and it clicked, and everything else got better, like straightness.
Well, I think that goes back to, I don't think people understand shoulders.
Right.
And I think people are not afraid to say that, but they just don't realize. Like I said, I'm pretty free with the fact that I didn't get them for a long time. I pretended like I did, but I didn't get them until about 15 years ago. And then it just kind of clicked. The more you can elevate those shoulders, the more you can get your horse off your front end, the more your horse can use themselves. I mean, that's really the bottom line. For a rollback, if your horse is heavy on the front end, they're going to drag that front end through. You want them to elevate those shoulders, get on that hind end so they can keep that front end free, roll back, and drive out of it. Shoulders are super important and super tough to learn.
Yeah.
Tough to work on. Okay, so we'll show shoulders. Again, we're just going to use pressure in the air for him right now. Again, when people, let me say this first. When people teach shoulders, I see a lot of people teaching it, and I think this is super important. They focus on the shoulder. The more you focus on one big body part on a horse, sometimes the heavier that body part gets. So we're talking shoulders, but I'm not focusing on it. I want him to elevate his front end and move it over. So I'm not going to be here at the shoulder. If I have to apply pressure to it, I will. But I want to be more in line with his eye and his nose. And I'm going to apply pressure here. And again, if I have to correct the shoulder, I will. But I want to stay more with his face. Good boy, buddy. I'll just take that pressure off and he kind of fades into it. A lot of people, when they ask shoulders, they will ask it, oh bud. And then when they stop, they pull their horse to a stop. When you do that, you're pulling that shoulder back on you and you're making them heavier. You always want to just release that pressure and let them fade right into it. Fade into that pivot, fade into whatever you're asking. Again, a lot of people, when you're talking shoulders, they want to get back here and stare right here. You do want your horse to cross over. If we're moving shoulders to the right, we want left leg to cross over right. Now, that brings you to a lot of adjustments, because if your horse, and actually moving shoulders or a pivot is a forward motion, which I think confused me for a long time. I get it's forward energy, but you want your horse to move sideways. So a lot of people will let their horses, when they pivot, kind of walk forward and pivot like this. I want him to move his hind end. So pivot like that. They'll take a step with the front end, step with the hind end. That's not, to me, a true pivot. I want him to plant a foot in the back, get on that hind end, and pivot around it. So when I ask him, now quite a few horses will kind of come forward and walk too far forward. A lot of horses, if you correct them, they'll start backing up too much, and when they pivot, they will cross left foot behind right, kind of like this. If I make him get back, he'll pivot. Well, no, he won't. There we go.
He started it.
Behind himself. There, like that. So that's not correct either. When you work on shoulders, it's a lot of adjusting. So if my horse is too tight and kind of stepping behind them, I'll bring that shoulder forward as I'm moving it over. I'll kind of give them energy forward. If they're walking too much, I'll just bump them back a little bit and keep moving that shoulder. But you're continually moving the shoulder. So we'll do it one more time. We're just going to ask him to move his shoulders. And just need to cross left over right. Good boy. Ooh. Good boy. Questions?
So now, with the shoulders, when I started learning to do shoulders, I know I had a really hard time figuring out when my horse did it, because when you're doing it and you're applying your energy here, you're not focused on this flow.
Any exercise, people get stuck on the steps of the exercise, and I have gotten over that. I don't really care if people follow the steps exactly. I don't care how pretty they look, just that they get the job done. And I think that's a lot of adjusting. And the more you know that you can adjust, the better you are.
Right.
And that follows through to your riding. You have to adjust when you're riding. You can't sit there stiff and still and hold your hands right here and be super stiff all the time. Your horse isn't going to listen. If he doesn't listen to your leg here, you're going to have to pull it back a little bit to exaggerate that pressure so they will listen. That doesn't mean you always pull your leg back, but if you have to make your point, you want to exaggerate it and bring that pressure back. So you're always adjusting, and I think people get stuck in moving the shoulder and they forget. Like if I have a horse that wants to back up, I'll back up with him with
Right.
the shoulder. If I have a horse that wants to go forward, I'm not going to stand right here. I'm going to come forward and bump him back and move from here. You're always adjusting, which is, I think, what you're getting at. That people get stuck on just
Right.
staying here.
Right, right. And then the shoulder starts to move, and then because you don't move with the shoulder, you end up pulling that horse
Correct.
back over. So
Correct.
you're really being counterproductive. You have
Right.
to stay fluid and
Yes.
go with it.
And again, you release when you're getting what you want, which is that crossover, then moving those shoulders along with planting a pivot foot on the hind end. If your horse is moving the hind end, he's not planting a pivot foot and he's not moving shoulders correctly.
You're just walking a circle.
Yes. And again, we'll talk more about this later. So let's move on to the fifth body part, which is rib cage. This is another one of those things that can be confusing for people. And I don't think you should even talk rib cage. I have a client that likes to talk about collection, and he's not ready for collection.
Collection is a thing. We could talk about it forever.
All your body parts before you can talk collection. You need to slow down, fill in those holes in your foundation, and then you understand a bit more. So rib cage is basically, and Cletus is actually a pretty good example because his rib cage at 20 years old with his sway back is pretty big. So he likes to hang. If he doesn't have to use this big old belly, he doesn't. He likes to be hollow. So using his rib cage is a big deal for him, especially now. He used to be better at it, but well, the belly got a hold of him. It's all downhill.
Dad bod.
Okay, so what I do for rib cage is I'll do an exercise walking around me, and I'll have him walk around me. Now, I'm going to talk for a minute while he's moving around me. You always want to be driving your horse in this circle. A lot of people want to pull. That's making them drop shoulders in. You should be behind the girth area, behind the drive line, whatever you want to call it, driving his body forward. I don't want to be pulling on his face, and I don't want speed right now. I want him to kind of do this at the walk. If he slows down, I'm going to send him forward, but then I'm going to ask him to get round. Now, rib cage should basically be putting all your body parts together when he lifts the rib cage. So he should be, what I want from him in this exercise is to lift his rib cage, but when he does that, he's going to tip his nose in and not hang on my rope. So I'll bump him a little right there. He's going to give me that face, soften that pull. He's going to lift that shoulder up, and he's going to drive under himself from the hind end. Now what Cletus will do is he'll drop this hip in. So, hang on, buddy. So when he drops that hip in, I'm going to correct his rib cage and drive him forward. I want him to drive from that hip and pick up his rib cage. I want him to almost arc around me. So right there, he's dropping his hip. So I'm going to bump him in the rib cage, make him pick it up. There you see him step out and create that arc. And right there is pretty nice. I'll just bump his rib cage again, have him lift himself. Good boy. He's pulling on my hand, so I'll bump him, send him forward. It's really hard to put all these body parts together if you're not driving them very going sideways, because you always want forward motion. So pick up his rib cage. There we go. So right there is pretty good. He's driving that hip under him. There, he's pulling sideways. You get it pretty good for like a driving forward. He's trying to leave me. There. He's leaving me again with his shoulder, so we'll just drive forward. And this takes a while. This is where you have to be super patient. Again, he hasn't done this in a little while, and it's harder for him. He's old, he's a little out of shape. When he gives me a few good steps, I'll bump his rib cage right there. There, that's super soft. I'm gonna ask for his hip and release that pressure. Good boy, buddy. We'll try it on the other side, and then we'll kind of talk about rib cage if you want, Lindsay.
Okay.
So I'll send him the other way. Again, first off, he's kind of leaving me. I want this circle small and tight. So I'm going to just lift up that rib cage, soften that face. This side's a bit better. And I kind of know Cletus backward and forward. This side's a bit better, actually, because of his right shoulder. He's super stiff in his right shoulder, so he's not dropping it. He's not pulling away from me. Going the other direction, he pulls away from me. Well, now he's going to try to speed up and cheat. So I'll bump him down into the walk. Again, I want him to do this at the walk. I want slow motion where he has to really work. There, that's pretty good. So I don't even have to correct him very much on this side. I just correct that nose to get some softness, because I know he's super stiff in this right shoulder. Right there, he dropped his right shoulder. I'll correct him. And right there, soften, and I'll take that. That's a try. Good boy, Bubba. Again, I said that I kind of watch a lot of people and try to learn as much as I can. I watched somebody the other day talk about rib cage, and they showed rib cage by side passing. And that's, to me, it's not rib cage. It's all the body parts working together in a more advanced maneuver. A horse can side pass and still be hollow and drop his rib cage, where they can be dragging their hip and not side passing correctly. So I don't think side passing is a true demonstration of using the rib cage. I think working in this circle makes them really lift that rib cage, drive under from the hind end, and the more you can create it and make that muscle memory, the easier it is for them to use their rib cage and engage it with their hind end. So
Yeah.
that's my take on the rib cage.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have an understanding of all of the other body parts before you start to do this, because if you don't understand how hips work, or you don't have control of the hips or shoulders, when they start dropping a hip or dropping a shoulder, you're not going to realize, and you're not going to be able to correct. So you're going to create incorrect muscle memory, essentially.
Correct. And it's also important, like I kind of showed Cletus with this exercise, it's important to know your horse and to know where their weaknesses are. Like, I can tell you his weaknesses forwards and backwards. I know how he thinks. I know that he's stiffer in that right shoulder, so he's going to drag that way. I know if you don't ask correctly with your leg for a lead, I know Cletus will pick up left lead going to the right. You have to move his left hip and feel that left hip move for him to pick up the right lead. That doesn't mean he doesn't have both his leads. He has a flying change and everything else. It's just that right side's a little stiffer, a little lazier, and that's his weakness. So I think knowing your horse helps you with the body parts a whole lot better also than just trying to look at the body part. You have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, all the body parts are attached.
And yourself. You have to improve how you ask, where you are, what you're thinking, because it's a lot. It's a lot. You're doing about 84 things at once.
Yeah.
And it gets a little confusing at times.
Yeah, no,
So-
I mean, I think that all ties in, and we'll talk about partnership later, but
Yep.
that's all part of it.
Yep. Okay. Is that it?
Yeah, I think we
All right.
covered everything.
Cool. All right. So this will work into more videos, but we just kind of wanted to talk about body parts because we were talking about them, how people talk about them, and we wanted to give our opinion and make it a little more clear for where we're trying to go with this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's bazillions of different people and videos on everything we talked about, but, you know, like Lois said, we all kind of keep learning and keep watching and look for new ideas and have takeaways from some things and throw things else, other things away. It's just kind of about finding what works for you the best.
Yep. And growing from it. You
Yep.
can't stick with one thing for 20 years.
Yeah,
You have to evolve. You have to change.
yep, absolutely.
All right.
All right, well, thanks for watching this video on moving body parts, and we'll go into more depth on each of these videos. If you missed the lowering the head with pole pressure video, make sure you check that out. That's on our YouTube channel. You can go ahead and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, Snapchat, our Facebook page, and check out our website, www.begritty.net. Thanks for watching.